The screams of cicadas filled the warm summer air as 5 friends hiked along the winding trail of Yellowstone National Park. Sweat beaded on their foreheads as they navigated the rocky terrain, occasionally stopping to marvel at the geysers and pristine wilderness surrounding them. Michael, a tall man with a rugged beard, led the group with a tattered map clutched in his hands. Behind him walked Jessica, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, followed by Thomas, a slender man with wire-rimmed glasses. Sarah and David brought up the rear, engaged in animated conversation about the local wildlife. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they ventured deeper into the park, farther from the typical tourist paths. The trees grew denser here, filtering the sunlight into eerie, shifting patterns across the forest floor. An inexplicable silence suddenly fell over the woods. The birds ceased their songs, the insects their buzzing, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Michael paused, his brow furrowing as he glanced around. "Does anyone else feel that?" he asked, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Before anyone could respond, a deafening crack split the air, like thunder without a storm. The ground beneath them trembled violently, and a blinding flash of white light enveloped them. In the sudden chaos, no one noticed that Thomas and Jessica had vanished, there one moment and gone the next, without so much as a scream or a trace. The remaining 3 friends stood frozen in shock as the light faded and the forest returned to normal, the birds resuming their songs as if nothing had happened. "Thomas," Michael called out, his voice echoing through the trees. "Jessica," Sarah spun around frantically, her eyes wide with fear. "They were right here," she cried, pointing to the empty space beside them. David pulled out his phone, cursing when he saw there was no signal. The 3 searched the area desperately, calling their friends' names until their voices grew hoarse. They examined every inch of the surrounding forest, looking for footprints, broken branches, any sign of where Thomas and Jessica might have gone. But it was as if they had simply evaporated into thin air. No clothing snagged on branches, no personal items dropped in haste, nothing. As darkness began to fall, a creeping dread settled over them. The forest, once beautiful, now seemed menacing, the shadows between the trees harboring unknown terrors. "We need to get help," Michael finally said, his voice hollow with fear. They made their way back to the ranger station, stumbling through the darkness, jumping at every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves. The park rangers organized an immediate search, bringing in dogs and helicopters with thermal imaging. The search continued through the night and into the following days, expanding to cover miles of wilderness. But as days turned into weeks, hope dwindled. Thomas and Jessica had disappeared without a trace, as if they had been swallowed by the earth itself. Meanwhile, in a place beyond understanding, Thomas opened his eyes to find himself lying on soft, yellow grass that swayed gently in a warm breeze. His head throbbed with a dull ache as he slowly sat up, disoriented and confused. Beside him, Jessica stirred with a groan, her blonde hair splayed across the strange golden vegetation. "What happened?" she mumbled, her voice thick with bewilderment. Thomas could only shake his head, words failing him as he took in their surroundings. They were no longer in the familiar confines of Yellowstone National Park. Instead, they sat atop a gently sloping hill covered in knee-high grass the color of saffron. The sky above was not the deep blue of Earth but a pale, ethereal green, streaked with wisps of silver clouds. Most shocking of all was the sun, a pulsating orb of blue-white that cast an otherworldly light across the landscape. But it wasn't alone in the sky. Hanging impossibly large on the horizon was what could only be described as a planet, a massive sphere with swirling bands of purple and gold, partially obscured by wispy clouds. Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat as the terrible realization dawned on him: they were no longer on Earth. "Jessica," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I don't think we're in Wyoming anymore." She gripped his arm tightly, her fingernails digging into his skin as if to anchor herself to something familiar in this alien landscape. "That's not possible," she responded, but her words lacked conviction as her eyes took in the impossible vista before them. Back on Earth, the disappearance of Thomas and Jessica became a media sensation. The story of 5 friends venturing into the wilderness, only for 2 to vanish without a trace, captivated the nation. Theories abounded: kidnapping, animal attack, murder, even alien abduction. The FBI joined the investigation, combing through the lives of the missing pair and their 3 friends, searching for any motive or clue. Michael, Sarah, and David were questioned repeatedly, their stories dissected for inconsistencies, their backgrounds scrutinized for secrets. The weight of suspicion and grief hung heavy on their shoulders as weeks turned into months with no answers. The families of the missing offered substantial rewards for information. Psychics and self-proclaimed paranormal experts descended on Yellowstone, each claiming to have insight into the mysterious disappearance. None provided answers that led anywhere. As time passed, the media frenzy gradually subsided, but the case remained open, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking in what many considered safe spaces. Park rangers began warning visitors about the Yellowstone vanishing, and tourism in that specific area declined sharply. Parents held their children closer when hiking, constantly looking over their shoulders for whatever unseen force had taken Thomas and Jessica. On the alien world, Thomas and Jessica cautiously made their way down the hill toward the cluster of buildings they had spotted in the valley below. The structures were unlike anything they had ever seen, seamless, pearlescent domes that seemed to grow organically from the ground, connected by graceful arches and bridges that defied conventional architecture. As they approached, they saw figures moving among the buildings, unmistakably human in form but with skin in varying shades of light green. Fear gripped them both, but curiosity and the need for answers pushed them forward. The first contact was terrifying. A tall, green-skinned woman with almond-shaped eyes noticed them and approached. Thomas stepped protectively in front of Jessica, his heart hammering in his chest, preparing for the worst. But the woman simply extended her hands, palms up, in a gesture that somehow conveyed peace across the language barrier. "Welcome, travelers," she said in perfect English, her voice melodious and soothing. Thomas and Jessica exchanged shocked glances. "You speak our language?" Jessica stammered. The woman smiled, revealing teeth that gleamed like opals. "We speak many languages," she replied. "We have studied your world for centuries. My name is Lyra, and you're on Elysium, 3rd planet of the Andromeda Nexus." Thomas felt his knees weaken at the confirmation of what he had already suspected. They were no longer on Earth, but somewhere unimaginably distant. "How did we get here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "And more importantly, how do we get back?" Years passed on Earth, and the case of the Yellowstone vanishing became the stuff of urban legend. Books were written, documentaries filmed, and countless internet forums dedicated to solving the mystery. The 3 survivors struggled to move forward with their lives, forever marked by that fateful day. Michael became a recluse, moving to a cabin in the mountains, obsessively researching similar disappearances throughout history. Sarah channeled her grief into activism, establishing a foundation for missing persons that helped hundreds of families. David turned to alcohol to numb the pain and guilt, his life spiraling into a series of dead-end jobs and failed relationships. On the 10th anniversary of the disappearance, they reunited at the spot where their friends had vanished, each carrying the burden of that day in their own way. They laid flowers on the now sacred ground, tears flowing freely as they remembered Thomas and Jessica. "I still have nightmares," Sarah confessed quietly. "I see them reaching out to us, calling for help, but we can't hear them." Michael nodded solemnly. "Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there somewhere, trying to find their way home." Little did they know how far from home their friends truly were, or how little desire they now had to return. On Elysium, time moved differently for Thomas and Jessica. What began as terror gradually transformed into wonder as they were integrated into the Elysian society. Lyra became their guide and friend, patiently explaining the history and culture of this advanced civilization. The Elysians, they learned, were distant cousins of humanity, having evolved along similar but separate paths. Their society had mastered the art of planetary harmony thousands of years ago, eliminating war, poverty, and most disease through a combination of advanced technology and social evolution. "Our ancestors made a choice," Lyra explained one evening as they sat beside the Emerald Lake, watching the giant planet rise in the sky. "They chose cooperation over competition, sustainability over exploitation. It wasn't easy. They faced many of the same challenges your world now confronts. But they persevered, and over generations, created what you see around you." Thomas and Jessica were given a dwelling of their own, a small but elegant dome on the outskirts of the city. They were taught the language, customs, and technology of their new home. At first, they asked daily about returning to Earth, but as they learned more about Elysian society, these requests became less frequent, then ceased altogether. The Elysians could travel between stars using technology that manipulated the fabric of space-time itself, creating temporary wormholes that allowed near instantaneous travel across vast distances. The random opening of such a passage had brought Thomas and Jessica to Elysium, a 1,000,000-to-1 cosmic accident that could not be easily reproduced. As the artificial lighting in the dome adjusted to simulate evening, Thomas sat with Jessica on their balcony overlooking the sprawling city of curved structures and lush gardens. After 3 Earth years on Elysium, they had fully adapted to their new reality. "Do you ever think about going back?" Jessica asked, her once blonde hair now streaked with subtle blues, a fashion choice popular among younger Elysians that she had embraced. Thomas considered the question carefully before answering. "I think about them," he said, referring to their friends and families on Earth. "I wonder how they're coping, if they're still looking for us." "But go back," he shook his head slowly. "We've seen too much, Jess. We know too much. How could we return to a world of artificial scarcity and perpetual conflict after experiencing this?" Jessica nodded, understanding perfectly. On Elysium, there was no hunger, no homelessness, no war. Resources were abundant and equitably distributed. Education, healthcare, and the pursuit of knowledge were universal rights, not privileges. The Elysians worked not for survival but for fulfillment, each contributing their talents to society while having ample time for art, exploration, and personal growth. They had learned that Elysians lived extraordinarily long lives. The average lifespan was over 1,300 years, with disease and aging slowed to a crawl by advanced biotechnology. Thomas and Jessica had already received treatments that would extend their lives far beyond what would have been possible on Earth. They were, in essence, becoming Elysian themselves. The technology of Elysium seemed nothing short of magical to the Earth transplants. Transparent devices thinner than paper could access the sum total of Elysian knowledge. Transportation occurred via silent, floating platforms that moved effortlessly through the air. Energy was abundant and clean, harvested from the quantum fabric of space itself. Even more impressive was the Elysians' mastery of biology. They could heal almost any injury or illness, enhance physical and mental capabilities, and even reshape their bodies according to personal preference. Thomas had been particularly fascinated by their agricultural systems, vast fields of crops that grew without pesticides or artificial fertilizers, yielding harvests year-round. Jessica had immersed herself in Elysian art, learning to create 3-dimensional light sculptures that responded to music and emotion. But perhaps most remarkable was the Elysian approach to governance, a fluid, consensus-based system where decisions were made collaboratively, with advanced AI systems modeling outcomes and helping identify optimal solutions. There were no politicians, no parties, no power struggles, only problems to be solved and opportunities to be explored. Earth seems so primitive in comparison, Jessica remarked one day after attending a session on Elysian history. "It's like comparing stone tools to quantum computers." Thomas could only agree. The more they learned about Elysian society, the more Earth's problems seemed self-inflicted, the product of outdated thinking and systems designed to concentrate power rather than distribute it. On Earth, the 20th anniversary of the Yellowstone vanishing brought renewed interest in the case. A popular streaming service produced a dramatic series based on the disappearance, taking significant creative liberties with the facts. Michael, now in his 50s with streaks of gray in his beard, refused all interview requests. Sarah's foundation had grown into an international organization with offices in 12 countries. David had finally found sobriety and peace as a wilderness guide, leading groups through national parks and always telling them the story of his lost friends as a cautionary tale. The mystery had become part of American folklore, mentioned in the same breath as the Bermuda Triangle and Area 51. Parents still warned their children not to stray from designated paths in national parks, lest they vanish like the Yellowstone 2. Scientific papers were still occasionally published, proposing new theories about sudden sinkholes, unexpected gas emissions, or even meteorological anomalies that might explain the disappearance. None came close to the truth. The case remained officially open but practically cold, filed away with countless other unsolved mysteries. The families of Thomas and Jessica had long since held memorial services, finding what closure they could without bodies to bury or answers to cling to. Life had moved on for everyone except those closest to the missing pair, who carried the weight of uncertainty like a stone in their hearts. 5 decades after their arrival on Elysium, Thomas and Jessica had been fully transformed by their new home. Their bodies, rejuvenated and enhanced by Elysian biotechnology, appeared no older than when they had first arrived, though their eyes held the wisdom of their experiences. They had fully integrated into Elysian society, making friends, learning professions, and even finding love among their green-skinned hosts. Thomas had become an expert in cross-species agriculture, developing hybrid plants that combined the best traits of Earth and Elysian flora. Jessica had risen to prominence in the arts, her unique Earth perspective bringing fresh ideas to Elysian creative circles. They had both learned to pilot interstellar vessels, accompanying Elysian exploration teams to distant worlds, witnessing cosmic wonders beyond human imagination, binary star systems with planets of liquid metal, gas giants with rings that dwarf Saturn's, and primordial worlds where life was just beginning to emerge from the primordial soup. On one such expedition, their ship passed relatively near to the Milky Way, and the navigation system identified Earth as a small, blue dot among countless stars. Thomas and Jessica stood together in the observation dome, gazing at their former home, now impossibly distant in both space and memory. "They're all gone now," Jessica said softly, thinking of their friends, their families, everyone they had known on Earth. Even the children who were born after we disappeared would be elderly now. Thomas took her hand, his touch familiar after decades of friendship. "But we're still here," he replied, "and we have centuries yet to live." As they journeyed back to Elysium, Thomas reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought him to this world. That terrifying moment in Yellowstone had seemed like the end of everything, but it had actually been a beginning. Sometimes he wondered about the mechanics of their transition. Had it truly been a random cosmic accident as the Elysians claimed, or was there some deeper purpose to their selection? Such questions had occupied him during his early years on Elysium, but now they seemed less important than the life he had built here. Jessica, too, had long since stopped questioning their good fortune. They had been given a gift beyond price, to witness and participate in a civilization that represented humanity's highest potential, free from the constraints and conflicts that had defined Earth's history. As their ship approached Elysium, the familiar Emerald Lake came into view, reflecting the blue-white sun and the massive planet that dominated the sky. The city spread out below them, its organic architecture seamlessly integrated with the natural landscape. It was home now, in a way Earth had never been. "They would never believe it," Jessica said, echoing Thomas's thoughts. "Even if we could go back and tell them, they would never believe that what seemed like the worst day of our lives was actually the best." Thomas nodded, watching as their ship descended toward the landing platform where friends awaited their return. "Perhaps someday Earth will find its way to the stars properly, and discover that they're not alone," he mused. "Until then, we carry Earth with us, in our memories and our DNA." The ship touched down gently on Elysian soil, completing another journey in lives now measured in centuries rather than decades. As they disembarked, Thomas and Jessica stepped confidently into the continuing adventure of their extraordinary lives, grateful for the cosmic accident that had transformed terror into wonder, and strangers into family across the unfathomable distances of space.